I'm Cheryl Jackson. You might think you need lots of toys and gizmos to help develop your baby's brains, but that's not what makes the difference. The greatest impact on brain development comes from your baby's relationships, because brain development in the first few years is social. Here to explain is Chaya Kulkarni. She's the Director of Infant Mental Health Promotion at the Hospital for Sick Children. Welcome, Chaya.
Hi.
So what do you mean when you say brain development is social?
So for young children, for infants and toddlers, their brain development is almost entirely dependent on the relationships that they have. So if babies are in a situation where they're actually not experiencing relationships, it has a very direct, I would almost call it an assault on the brain. And when we looked at some of the early research actually was done in European orphanages, in Eastern European orphanages, where they had these very young infants and toddlers, and you would see 3-4 babies in a crib. There was no interaction on a daily basis with a caregiver. And when MRI technology came to be, they actually were able to see that their brains were significantly smaller.
That is astounding.
Yeah, it really is astounding.
Why is that? What happens in the brain in those social interactions?
So what's happening in the brain is this, and I'm going to give you an analogy.
Okay.
So let's say it snowed, a really bad snowfall, and you opened your front door and the snow was like 10 feet tall and your car was at the end of your driveway. So the first trip out to your car, you're having to shovel, to make a path, and it's hard, but you do it. Mm-hmm. Every trip, that path gets more ingrained in so it's more
beaten down.
That's right.
Yeah.
Easier to follow, easier to navigate, more comfortable. It just feels okay by the 10th time you've probably done it. Well, the connections between brain cells aren't a whole lot different. So the more you use the path that you made, similar to a connection between brain cells, the stronger that connection is going to be.
Okay.
So when we talk about relationships being so important, a child who is regularly experiencing moments of joy, being comforted, when they are distressed, that a parent responds right away to that distress appropriately, the child who experiences that, those experiences are embedded into the brain. They are, contained in those connections that say to a baby, I'm lovable.
Right.
This person is going to be there to protect me.
Right.
This person is the person I go to when I need help. This person is someone who likes to play with me. And in fact, we will say to parents, you are your baby's best favorite toy in the world, before any of those other toys.
Now, what happens in a baby's brain then when the pathways that are formed are based on poor relationships?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, maybe they're not responded to, or there is a lot of stress in the house.
Yeah.
And
it literally will affect the quality of those connections, and that then starts to have an impact on the architecture of the brain. So what the brain actually looks like, that's what we learned from those orphanages, that, wow, it's a lot smaller, a lot less activity going on in the brain because we don't have the same kind of connectivity. Well, absolutely, and those experiences also become normalized in the child's brain, okay? Right. So if relationships are always aggressive, okay, that becomes normal for a child, right? So it starts to now lay the foundation for what relationships are going to look like for that child later in life. It influences a child's ability to learn. And most importantly, and people do not realize that, it actually has been shown now to influence long-term health outcomes.
Right. Do you think parents understand this? I mean, parents are running around buying the newest toy and this game and that game and the mobiles and
Yeah, and I'm not convinced that the parents understand it, and I wish toy companies would spend more time teaching parents how they can be part of the play, even with the toy. I mean,
sure. Right. Does it matter who the relationship is with? We've been talking about parents, but what if that parent isn't the best relationship for the child?
So we talk about there needs to be a primary caregiver, an attachment relationship with one person. So it could be a grandparent. We certainly have children who aren't being raised by their parents as well. Does it mean that they can't have that special person? Absolutely not. Could be anybody else in the family who takes on that role.
Sure. Now, I think a lot of parents get buy all the toys and the flashcards and all those things for their children because they want their children to learn and to be better at school, right? How do relationships affect learning later?
Yeah. So relationships, a child feeling that he's lovable, that he's important, that what he has is something that others actually think is valuable, is worth listening to. This absolutely influences a child's approach to learning. Okay, but the connections that have formed in the brain by those early relationships are actually going to strengthen a child's ability to learn. I mean, the brain is made up of all these different parts that are so influenced during those 2 years. The prefrontal cortex is where we house a lot of functions like memory and attention. We want those connections to be strong, so we have to continue to be playing with our kids, working with our kids, giving them the right kinds of experiences to strengthen those connections so that by the time they get to school, they're actually ready to learn. But if we haven't done that and a child arrives at school, it's very difficult to undo what has happened at that point.
Okay, I was just going to ask you what happens when those are not optimal relationships. I mean, if it affects learning that way, what about relationships?
Yes, so these are the same
on?
kids that you see either being bullied in the playground or bullying in the playground. So their ability to have relationships is, seriously compromised. One of the big learning moments for me in my career was just a couple of years ago when I was at a child welfare agency sitting in the lobby, and within about 2 minutes of sitting there, I had like 3 or 4 children whom I'd never seen before climbing all over me, ready to play, ready to be my best friend. And we call this indiscriminate behavior, that they just go to someone because they're just hoping that this person is going to have time for them, have attention for them, have some love for them.
Right.
That is not what children who have experienced a healthy relationship do. They are more discriminating in terms of who they go to.
Right.
So we want children to be discriminating about the relationships that they have.
What would be your best advice then to parents to really understand this?
I would say really contain the toy buying and look at the quality of time that you're spending with your child before you rush out to the toy store. They're going to be just as happy with you at home, reading stories, building blocks. I mean, I used to make my kids blocks. Not that every mother should be doing this, not to suggest that, but we would do it together. It was just something to do with old boxes, you know. I can remember with my kids, and I used to hear it all the time, they're more interested in the packaging than they are with what was inside.
Absolutely true.
Save those big old boxes. But the point is, whatever you do, even if it's that you are going to the toy store and buying toys, look at everything you do, including yourself, in that activity. So really try and create those moments when you're part of the play as opposed to watching the play.
Thank you very much, Chaya.
You're welcome.